Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the show. The COVID-19 pandemic has affected everyone at different levels, but my guest today is someone who decided to open up a hotel resort in the Bahamas, only to have obviously some struggles due to the pandemic, with visitors not being able to come and stay at this hotel resort. So joining me today to discuss how his business and his hotel was affected by COVID-19 and government shutdowns is Bryan Baeumler, who hosts Island of Bryan on HGTV. So, Bryan, my first question is just for people who maybe don't watch HGTV consistently. Obviously, my audience is more of a political type audience. So, for people who maybe don't watch HGTV consistently, maybe just speak a little bit about what you're doing with this Island of Bryan show and just the current state of the hotel resort in the Bahamas.
For sure. Interestingly enough, I have a degree in political science. That was my political science and some business in university, and I was headed for law school before I went back into trade school and got into construction and eventually television production, all kinds of fun stuff. And now, as you said, we're into hotel, the hotel business. We're hoteliers, I suppose. So Island of Bryan was a show that we pitched. It was a family decision to really change our lifestyle and kind of get off the hamster wheel. We found an abandoned resort, a 10-acre property in the Bahamas, on our travels there on the boat with the family. And I think within 5 minutes we made a decision as a family that let's try this. Let's bring this thing back to life. Let's buy it. It was more of a 5-minute discussion after that, doing our due diligence on the business and the property. Just the politics and the rules and regulations in the Bahamas. But we decided to film the entire thing for a series on Home and Garden Television, just to really bring people along on the journey and show them, options that are out there. I think a lot of people, get in a bubble in their neighborhood or in their province or in country or whatever it is. It was just, we found it would be really interesting for people to take that journey and the original pitch and idea wasn't received well, and there were people that thought, it was unrelatable and people may not watch and may not get interested in it. And I challenged them to find anyone in the corporate world, especially, that wouldn't be willing to trade in their life for a few years on a beach somewhere in the Bahamas.
You mentioned about some of the government policies that kind of made an influence in having to make the decision. So obviously, during COVID, it was one of the kind of big unknowns about doing it. And then, as I'm sure some people would know, obviously you weren't able to bring visitors to your resort for a large time due to the pandemic. So maybe speak a little bit about how some of the policies of the government in the Bahamas impacted them, and then kind of just speak a bit about how long you weren't able to bring visitors in for, because obviously you have this resort and you can't bring visitors in, which obviously is not a good financial position to be in.
No, there were, in hindsight, in retrospect, if we had, glasses that we could see into the future, we probably wouldn't have started the project at the time that we did. We finished and completed renovations on the hotel 6 weeks before, kind of this global travel shutdown started to come into play. A lot of people got nervous. Government started to get nervous and shutting down borders, and of course, there were a lot of travel loopholes available, but the government of the Bahamas was very strict and, it essentially restricted international travel. They restricted travel between the family islands and the Bahamas. If people aren't familiar with them, people tend to think Nassau is the Bahamas, but Nassau is a city on the island of New Providence, and the Bahamas itself is made up of over 700 islands. Apart from Freeport and Nassau, they refer to the other islands as the family islands, and those islands live and die by flights, by daily flights in between them, by cargo ships, by local fishermen traveling back and forth. So the policies that went into play were nobody's coming into the country, and there would be no travel between any of the islands apart from the cargo ships carrying goods and goods that people required to survive. And they would come into port and drop those off. Nobody was allowed to go near the ship. Of course, we had the same mask mandates. We had the same social distancing mandates, etc. So travel was essentially completely restricted 6 weeks after we opened the hotel. So we had a full load of guests for the full 6 weeks, and then as they started to depart, some chartered flights to get back before restrictions came into play. Obviously, massive financial impact on the aerospace industry, the travel industry. I mean, every industry really. And for us, it was an interesting time, trying to reassess and just believe what had just occurred. Now, thankfully, in our business plan, we had provided for 12 months of operations with full staff at 0% capacity, just as an emergency backup plan. Luckily, we did have one set of guests that stayed for a few months and rented the entire hotel privately. So that was a big saving grace. And once they departed, we were closed for, I think, another 5 or 6 months, which was incredibly expensive. A property like this, once you make the investment and you renovate and you add new materials, you can't just abandon it. The environment there, right on the beach, on the windward side of the island, is incredibly corrosive. The salt just eats everything. So we had to keep a regular maintenance and landscaping staff in and cleaning staff to upkeep the property. And we had to keep that to a minimum in order to survive as long as we could with a shutdown, because at the time we didn't know if it would be 3 months or 6 months or a year or 2 years or if that was it. So we really had to refocus and look at our financial plan and see how long we could survive, while at the same time trying to support the employees that we did have. We had just brought in people from other islands. We had just trained everybody. So it was a really difficult time.
You speak about it a little bit, but obviously one day you think, oh, this is going to be great, we're going to open it. And then the next day you have to think to yourself about, oh, all of a sudden there's this pandemic that's had to affect a lot of different places. But obviously, aside from you're still filming a TV show, you're still having to build this hotel resort. Maybe speak a little bit about your personal life and your family life and how that kind of happened on the island during the pandemic and just during having to build this hotel resort.
It was an interesting time because in Canada, Justin Trudeau called for all Canadians. It was time to return home, and we really had to do some deep soul searching and do an assessment of the safety and risk to our family and the best place for us to be. The truth is, we decided to stay on the island during the pandemic. We had our chef and his wife and 2 children there as well, and some of our maintenance team living on site. And, very isolated. Again, only ships coming in with food, only airplanes dropping food off and the essentials. And we made that decision based on the fact that, we're in a very remote area. We can go out fishing for 4 hours and catch enough fish to feed everybody for a week. We have enough coconuts on the property and different fruits and beverages. Fruits and vegetables that, it would prove very difficult to starve to death on that island if nobody, no ship ever arrived again with any goods or anything. So we made that decision, to avoid commercial travel with the family, to put ourselves at the risk of being corralled into an airport with a lot of other people. When really in the beginning stages of the pandemic, nobody really knew exactly what was going on. It started to spread slowly, and it had all the makings of a Hollywood movie. That really didn't come to that sort of fruition, but there was a lot of fear. So we made that decision to stay on the island. If you had told me when we opened the hotel that we were going to take, essentially an 8-month vacation on the beach with the family in a newly renovated hotel with 0 guests, I wouldn't have believed you.
Obviously you're involved in the housing industry and renovation industry with your show and then just construction and stuff. So, but specifically on the cost of housing, obviously, Canada just had an election campaign, and housing was a topic that was largely discussed in the campaign. The cost of housing, specifically here in Canada and in other parts of the world too, has went up. So maybe speak a little bit about, do you think the current state of our housing market here in Canada could affect the renovation industry? And I mean, obviously the cost of housing is going up. So do you think it's making people more intrigued to renovate their home or less intrigued with the cost of housing very high as a whole.
Well, there's a few really interesting points here. I was really disappointed with the election, seeing that the 630 or 670 million, I forget the exact number, that was spent on an election to essentially receive the exact same result. It was a frivolous and it was a very sad waste of money when there's so many communities in Canada that need clean water. There are so many programs that need funding. I thought it was absolutely ridiculous to begin with. The fact that the cost of housing was one of the key points of the campaigning was, again, with that intense waste of money was a really interesting point. We, in the construction development industry, we own a construction and development company in Canada, Baeumler Quality Construction. We have, over 60 employees there, and we had by far the largest, our biggest financial year, and we were the busiest we've ever been during the pandemic. Interestingly enough, as deemed an essential service, cost of goods went up. I mean, lumber almost tripled on us. Materials were tough to get. A lot of things that the costs went up on, and the supply chains were horribly affected. However, people continued to dump money into their homes. They weren't traveling. They weren't spending money on, going out to restaurants and things. And it seems like they've invested in their homes. To be honest, what terrifies me, why, we have 4 children, Josephine and Lincoln and Charlotte and Quinton, and they are 8 and 10 and 14 and 16 right now. And what terrifies me is with the cost of housing in Canada, there's the same barriers to entry that there are into the big tech sectors or the automotive industries or the aerospace industries. It's very difficult to get your foot in the door and actually get in to own a property now if you're a young person. And that really scares me for our children, for you, for our children, for the younger people. And it's just spiraling out of control. And not to mention there's a lack of housing. So the demand is there. But if you look around the world in other countries, we're by far, ourselves in the United States and some other countries are very young. We're extremely young countries. We think we have everything figured out and all together, but every society on the planet that has crumbled at their strongest, or when they consider themselves to be their strongest. So, there are some massive issues with the economy. There's some massive issues with housing and infrastructure, and there are a lot of corporate entities now. I think I forget the specifics of it, but a few months ago there was an issue in Canada where a few $1 billion were going to be spent on sorry, have I got your back?
Yep, you're good.
That was my mom. My mom called. See, I put my mom on hold for you. So I think where I was going with that, there are corporate entities starting to buy single family homes, multifamily homes, buildings. You're seeing condos go up that are rental only. And really one of the, one second. So one of my big concerns for, young people in Canada and young people around the world in any, hot real estate market like this is the difficulty in getting in that market. One of the easiest way to build wealth and to build generational wealth, is to acquire real estate. There's, apart from a few volcanoes around the world, there's no new land being built. So, it's a real asset, and it's a real appreciating asset. The challenge will be, that to avoid going back into the feudal system where corporate entities, being the kings and queens, are starting to buy up massive amounts of single family and multifamily housing. We're seeing condo buildings go up that are rental only. And with the housing market inflating again, it makes it harder and harder to get in there. So you are now beholden to a corporate entity that owns residential property. And we have dogs too. So, a lot of people will be, let's start that one over. A lot of people will end up renting properties and be beholden to, to the kingdom, to paying rent and looking at a housing market that is inaccessible. And, as far as I'm concerned, that needs to be addressed. It needs to be limited. Because at the end of the day, if corporate entities own all the single family residential housing and the multifamily residential housing, access to that market gets harder and harder and harder. if you and I today decided to design and develop a new car, or design and develop a new cell phone or an airplane, the barriers to entry, the cost to entry to get into that space, and the R&D involved because of the size of some of these corporations that exist already are enormous. And while a lot of new opportunities open up for the younger generation, a lot of opportunities are locked up and closed. So real estate is definitely one of those. And I always counsel people, if they have a condo and they're looking to move into a house, I say, wait until you build enough equity till you can hold on to that and become a landlord and rent that out, maintain the equity in there. As long as there's any type of positive cash flow or even a slight negative cash flow, the value of the asset will increase, and you'll increase your wealth, because at some point everybody's got to hide their nuts in a tree somewhere so that they have something to eat in the retirement winter that's ahead of them.
Going forward, I mean, how much do you think that future government and economic policies could make a difference in housing prices? I know I've heard a lot of people, even politicians that I've talked to, say it's really an issue of supply and demand as regarding the housing market. I mean, would you agree with that point? And just again, how much of an impact do you think future economic policies could have?
I would definitely agree with that. Supply and demand is how the capitalist markets work. I have a lot of people that I speak to at different shows, and they talk about the shame of different technologies and what have you. And it really is a consumer-driven market in most sectors. The issue is for anyone living in Canada or anywhere around the world, there are basic needs, and those basic needs are safety and security, housing, food. So food and shelter are two, real needs when you break it down. A lot of other things are wants. So the economic policies that affect construction, development, the subsidies that are available, 100% affect that market. There's a lot of people making a lot of great money because of the supply and demand issue, and it depends what side of that issue you're on. However, that being said, again, the essential things we need are food and shelter. That basically boils down to that. So when you're looking at a market where costs and fees are just exploding, when they affect our two basic needs, that's a real danger to the next generation, because that's how a lot of wealth is built, and it's how a lot of wealth is lost. So future economic policies, I think, really have to focus on those basic needs: food, shelter, water, and just trying to control, material costs, trying to control, absorption of the market by large entities that are these funds and large financial groups that are just buying up single family residential. And at some point, if it's not controlled, it's going to spiral to the point where not only will you and my children not be able to afford to buy a home, but you won't be allowed to buy a home. It's going to get to the point where there's nothing available, and at that point, you need shelter. So you really won't have an option. So I really think that I don't have all the answers, but I really think that people need to start thinking about those answers and developing solutions to that problem.
All right, Bryan. Well, that was my final question. So thanks for joining me. And again, it's been great talking to you.
Great talking to you as well. Thank you very much, Wyatt.
Thank you.